the, industry-wide, you're not supposed to be researching past 6 days, do you see any possible wiggle room in that language?
So the question is, does Prop 2, which is now Article 1, Section 27 of the state constitution, provide wiggle room for private corporations, not academic medical centers that have the kind of oversight that I talked about to do things that we might think are troublesome? The answer is that the state law says you can only do research that is conducted in a safe and ethical fashion, and the research has to be research permitted under federal law. So the guidelines are still there, and a private company would still have to act according to those guidelines. Now, we have seen, not companies, but groups, including one religious group, make arguments that they have been able to do things like clone a human being. That turned out to be nonsense. This Article 1, Section 27 would control that research, which means that the state could regulate it. There was a question on the side here. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that Michigan was competitive for talent on a national basis. What about on an international basis?
Yeah, the question is, we mentioned that Michigan is now competitive for talent on a national basis, but what about an international basis? There are some places that are working very hard to do this kind of science. You saw the problems in, where was it, South Korea, where a researcher initially indicated some promising breakthroughs, and those were determined to have been fraudulent. There is a very large billion-dollar bio investigation bureau in where is that?
Singapore.
In Singapore, that has taken some scientists from England. So this is, you are quite right, this is a worldwide competitive market. We have not lost people internationally. Prior to the passage of Prop 2, we did lose one of our scientists to California, and we hope that that won't happen in the future. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the ethnicity survey and embryonic stem cells. Is that ethnicity as we define it, like figuring out what, I mean, ethnic culture that someone, or is that a definition, a scientific definition?
Yes. So is ethnicity of the project that I referred to earlier dealing with the culture or some other scientific definition? It's more of like geodiversity. So with a collaborator we work with at the University of Michigan has a way of using DNA sequence to map the region of the world or a close proximity of it that a particular line has come from based on reference samples. And so it's not a cultural aspect, it's whether or not the genetic profile of those lines match or how closely they match the genetic profile of someone known to be from, you know, Eastern Europe or South America, for example.
So if we're studying something like, I don't know, thalassemia, a disease that's endemic in parts of Israel and parts of Italy, we would want to try to study that on gene lines that were characteristic of that geographic area. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I hate to keep asking them, but you mentioned that there are profound ethical questions regarding using embryonic stem cells. You said that, so just I know it's maybe repeating it, but what are those things?
So the question is, what we mentioned that there are profound ethical questions regarding use of embryonic stem cells, and the question is, can we be more specific? And the answer is, there are people who believe that an embryo from the moment of creation represents human life, and should never be interfered with. It is that ethical question that we are dealing with. The issue, of course, is that embryos now can be destroyed because they are not needed for reproductive purposes. So the question is research doing anything different? Our answer is research is simply allowing embryos that were going to be destroyed anyway to be used in a way that hopefully can lead to cures. As Sean Morrison is fond of saying, the old Michigan law never prevented a single embryo from being destroyed. It simply prevented it from being used to find cures.
Okay, well, I guess that just leads back to, it seems that the in vitro fertilization process seems to be rather wasteful if it's producing so many extra embryos. I mean, I normally cover the automotive industry. The old process used to be sending defective cars down the line to show all the mistakes at the end. That never happened.
Right, as opposed to the Japanese model that produced it right the first time. Yeah, so the question is, I shouldn't say that in Michigan, should I? No, the question is, going back to in vitro fertilization. So the first thing to say is what lawyers love to do, which is a disclaimer. Neither Dr. Mosier nor I are reproductive medicine physicians. We are not, I actually can't speak on behalf of reproductive medicine. My best understanding is that the techniques they are using are the most scientifically accurate and best available techniques to do what they set out to do, which is produce a viable embryo suitable for implantation and growth. I do know that there are recent reports, because the question has always been, how many embryos ought you to put into a uterus to produce a child? And I do know that the more recent reports are saying that you have just as much success with 1 or 2 embryos as you do with multiple. And if that is true, science needing to be replicated to be true, if that is true, then it is likely that in the future, in vitro fertilization will require the production of less embryos. Now remember, this is not a perfect system. What you do is you harvest eggs, you introduce the sperm to the eggs, and however many eggs get fertilized is however many eggs get fertilized. So, you know, it's not like you take one sperm and say, look, you, go over there. So, you know, that there's an inherent problem. Yes, ma'am.
Has there been an effort at the University of Michigan to sort of, since we have this ESCO committee and it knows who's doing what where, sort of organize and work together and prioritize? Or is it kind of every researcher on his or her own scrambling to find the answer or the cure for his particular area of study?
So the question was, at the university, is there a collective effort to treat certain diseases, or is it, in your words, kind of every investigator for themselves, or to paraphrase what you said? So it's a little of both. In terms of the A. Alfred Taubman Consortium, there's a collective effort to understand a particular set of diseases and use the available technologies to understand that disease. But at the same time, investigators have many projects going on at one time, some of which are very independent from the rest of the university or the rest of the people studying stem cell biology. And it's that diversity that allows scientists to form their own unique area of expertise and contribute that when needed for larger projects like the A. Alfred Taubman Consortium.
So one of the things about science is sometimes it works best when you get a bunch of people together, each of whom have a piece of the puzzle. Jack described the diversity research where we have one person expert in the geo part and another person expert in another part. And sometimes science works best when you just find a really smart person and say, here's a lab, go have fun. And you can't circumscribe everybody, but you can try to look at, well, if Harvard is doing this and Hopkins is doing this, then what